Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion, and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience at SmithWeekly, including Mark R., Ryan S., Jackie A., Nick W., Mike P., and Andy J. On the program today is a returning guest. Greg Hall is back with us. Greg is the CEO and Managing Director of Alligator Energy. The company is focused on development of the Samphire ISR uranium project in South Australia, of which is in the feasibility stages and has a JORC compliant all categories resource of about 17.5 million pounds uranium. Alligator Energy also has a number of various stage exploration projects in South Australia and Northern Territories, such as Alligator Rivers and Big Lake. Alligator Energy is listed on the Australian Securities Exchange under the symbol AGE and also on the US OTC markets under the symbol ALGEF. Greg, it's great to speak with you again. Welcome. How are you doing, sir?
Very good, thank you, Andrew. Thanks for the invitation, and very happy to have a good chat with you. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, Greg, great to have you back. It's been a while, and I think what we'll do on this one here, Greg, we're going to start this episode off with a new question, one that we normally don't ask at the front end, but we're going to do it anyway, just to have a bit of fun. What is your favorite beverage? And it can be while working, can be during dinner, meetings, etc. What's your favorite beverage?
Okay, I would probably have three. During working, I love coffee. I like a strong black coffee with just a touch of sugar. I'm a bit addicted to it. I probably have too many. A small day is two, a long day is seven, but I like coffee. Secondly, I love a red wine. I'm fortunate enough to live in a state, South Australia, where there is about 6 significant wine regions. My house is quite close to the city, but within 1 hour's drive of my house, there are 200 cellar doors of wineries, and many of them make beautiful red wine. So I enjoy a variety of red wine, everything from a lighter Grenache or Tempranillo right through to big, solid Shiraz wines from the Barossa Valley. So I enjoy a red wine. And thirdly, if I'm having a fun night with a close friend, I do like a bit of spiced rum. And I have had some very nice Dominican aged rums and things like that, which I do enjoy now and then, but not so much as in lot volume wise, but I do love the taste of that. So there you go. You got a 3 for 1 there.
Oh, thank you. No, we appreciate that. And you only had to pick one, and all of them sound quite good for the different things throughout the day. And certainly over in this side of the world, rum is definitely plentiful, and there's a number of good selections and some that actually people aren't too familiar with. So really
Mm.
appreciate that, Greg, and wine country, of course, and the black coffee, I relate to that as well. So really appreciate the comments on that. Well, why don't we talk the market for a moment, Greg? Of course,
Mhm.
it's always good to hear from a person that's astute in the market, such as you. What do you see standing out from your desk as to current events in the uranium market and how you see things shaping up, maybe for the rest of the year?
Yeah, look, your listeners and you in particular, Andrew, have a long background in the market. You understand it. You know the ins and outs politically, the different politics around the world, and our industry and our market in particular has always had a lot of politics associated with it, and this current time is no different. So what's occurring in Russia and Ukraine is still driving a range of things, including potential sanctions in a range of areas, but possible sanctions, of course, from the US in nuclear fuel. And while we're not surprised by them now, they are getting closer to being put in place. What's uncertain is the reaction of the Russians if that occurs. Everyone is fairly confident in the market that they've been working behind the scenes to make sure they're supported by China and perhaps India, and in terms of their nuclear fuel sales. But how that's going to work out and what the reactions might be will be interesting. That might set a little general concern into the market at the appropriate time. The Kazakh production, everyone's familiar with the level it's likely to be now, but also the fact that there'll be others drawing on that production, much more than the West likely. So How much of that will be available is a question mark. On the other side of the uranium supply business, you're seeing the restarts now occur. You're seeing Boss announce its first packed drum, and while I'm sure they're still going through their commissioning stages, they're at least making that progress, which is leading them towards production. You're seeing that occurring in Encore. You've seen it occur at UR Energy at their plant. They've started that up very well, UR Energy, and I think Peninsula won't be too far away in the latter part of this year to getting the ISR going. We're seeing Langer Heinrich start. Paladin have done a very solid job in getting that going. And you're seeing other projects getting close to the mark. So in a way, there'll be a little bit of comfort in some utilities that, yes, there's now a market response occurring. There will be still drivers like financial and trader drivers on the spot price, which will drive it up, drive it down. And we've all seen how that can react. Like as we've all understood, there was nearly £1 million sold into the spot market, and that put the price down by about nearly $10 a pound inside a few days, and then it responded back up. But that's what that market is. It's a spot price market, which is based on instant supply demand fundamentals. Who wants to buy, who wants to sell, and that moves. It's a long-term market, which is now of great interest. And having TradeTech put their long-term price at $80 a pound, UX is still 75, but nonetheless, that 75 to 80 long-term price is really setting a great benchmark for future production of new projects such as ours and others around the world. So I like the fact it's got some solidity about it in the term business. You're seeing people do deals which are gradually moving up, both floors, ceilings, or base. Where there is a base price, it's moving up. That's going to support the fundamentals for companies like ours coming into the market. We still are conscious of and keep an eye on the risk business, and having, as I've always said, having 3 nuclear plants in a war zone is never comfortable, but the fact that all the reactors at Zaporizhia are now in cold shutdown is good. That does remove, in particular, what could be a global public risk if there's something significant happens. So I think that's valuable. And I think the IAEA has done a fantastic job in managing that difficult process. In terms of supply chains and construction for new projects, there's still some issues got to be managed, but essentially what you've got to do is you've got to put on like we've done, your project managers and your people who know how to do this work early, so that you can get early warning about issues and manage them and get alternates in place. And that's what we've been doing with our pilot process plant for Samphire. And we have that ready. It's under factory acceptance testing. We're finishing a few other things, but all that gear will be up on site well in time for our pilot trial and third quarter construction. So that's a bit of a summary. I'm not going to make a full prediction of where price might go. I'm sure it will be maintain its up and down cycle in the spot market, but I'm also confident we're going to see some pretty solid base for the term business, which will drive forward.
Very good comments here. I think that summarizes things well. And I think, again, as you said at the last piece there with the term price, these discussions are happening now, but they're for delivery in a number of years forward. So just think about that for a moment. You mentioned, we've had a lot of tier 1 stuff has been filled out. We've had challenges at the tier 1 level, and tier 2 level we're starting to see come in here, and tier 3, and kind of liken it to the pyramid chicken coop, where your poop does fall downhill. And as you get into that lower tiers, it increases the issue with respect to quality of contracting. And obviously that can spike utilities, so to speak, to look at sources and jurisdictions and backstop things that they might think is risky. Go down that chicken coop, if you will, it becomes more risky generally. The supply response has been quite challenged, as you said, and there's been some folks doing some good work. And of course, there's been some folks that are delayed and having some troubles here and there. But, at the end of the day, and we'll get back to this at the end, human resources here is a huge problem. And we'll come back to that, of course.
Yeah, just a quick one. I think you're correct, but I think utilities, while there's a lot of new buyers in utilities. A lot of the guys I dealt with are retired, but in general they have a similar approach. They will take a risk evaluated approach, so they will do layered contracts, and their layering of contracts will mean they'll take a larger volume from reliable suppliers, ongoing suppliers, and then they'll layer down to next tier suppliers. And as an example, in our early discussions with potential off takers. larger companies are willing to do an early conditional offtake with us, maybe starting only at a £50,000, building up to 100, and then an option to get larger, waiting for you to prove yourself, get that in place, and they're not relying on those pounds at the time of the delivery. So they'll make sure that working with a third tier or second tier company that's only just starting, they'll put a risk weighting on that delivery accordingly, and they're not going to rely on it. So I think that they do that, and that's all the utilities that I've dealt with in the past. They tend to do that structure.
Well said, and it's a good thing to point out here. Well, let's move right into Alligator here, Greg. Recent news, field recovery trial work. Talk about where we are on that front. Equipment is on the way to site or is already at site. Permitting for the testing work that
Yep.
is about to be wrapped up or is very near term on completion, I suspect. To talk about all of this, and then, of course, the updated schedule, if you will.
Yeah, certainly. I'll do it to the best of the ability. I'm reluctant to give exact dates, but I'm happy to give an idea. So look, I'll give you this general comment to your listeners, and I've said this publicly. When we started this process in late early 21, when we really started to look at what we had on the ground, got our first funds in, got our first drilling underway in late 21, we were hopeful, definitely hopeful under that schedule of getting into a field recovery trial in the latter part of 23. At the latest, that was really our intent. Now we're at least 6 or 9 months behind that. Now that's not unexpected, and those of us who've been in the industry a while, we don't like putting dates on things because it does take longer than you think. And you get other things on the way that change. We've spent more time getting on the ground. We've certainly taken our time recruiting a team. I waited till we had enough cash to get our Chief Operating Officer, Andrea Marsland-Smith, which many of your listeners will know. She has a lot of experience from the Beverly 4 Mile ISR projects that Heathscape run. And she's now built the full team around that. That took time. So you're right about the HR resources. We underestimate how long it takes, not only to get people in place, but then they need to get their feet under the desk. There's a 5-month period for someone to get absolutely confident, a lot of times 3 to 5 months that they're running the game they need to run. And so now that we've got that management team under Andrea for Samphire, that's been running well, in particular in the last 6 to 8 months. But it takes time to get there. So there's no question we're slower than we wanted to. We'll be more cautious about how we do scheduling going out in the future. But we are anticipating receiving the retention license approval within the coming weeks. We put our response document in March, and we know the time frame of that evaluation. There is then an operating plan that has to be approved, but that's not a go, no-go decision. We once the retention lease is in place, we're going to go. It's just about getting everything in that operating plan we need to, which does get a tick of approval. And our acceptance testing on the pilot plant is nearing completion, so we'll have that shipped to site. We've already got up there all the resin we need. We've got a lot of other backup equipment up there. We're about to order the pipe work. All of those things are in place. And we've got with that approval, we've got the full access onto the ground. We've already negotiated the arrangement with the pastoralists so that we can identify and fence the area that we need, and that's underway. So we'll be constructing in the third quarter, operating from late third quarter into the fourth quarter this year with the pilot process plant. Our project lead on that under Andrea. Andrea is mainly leading it, of course, but our project manager is helping to guide that process. We have already identified companies within the Whyalla region who can help the construction and commissioning and the ongoing maintenance of that plant as it operates, and that's fantastic. We were a little worried there might be a lot of activity up there with the steel mills and the iron ore mines in the Whyalla region, but it seems like there's plenty of capacity for us to utilise the skills there. And also then that project manager becomes our study manager as we move into a feasibility to the latter part of this year. So we'll have our tenders out for the feasibility study work to be underway next year. Those tenders will be coming out before the end of this year. So that's our progress on Samphire. We're drilling all year. So we're now drilling resource extension. So apart from last year was actually getting the quality of the resource up, especially the indicated portion, so we could have confidence in the schedules and production schedules in the scoping studies. We now are looking to extend that. And we'll shortly have an announcement out on our first drilling results and the regions we're seeing some extension, which is good. We've also been on the ground to the southern part of our tenements where we didn't have the ground gravity surveys that show up the channels, the buried paleo channels. We've got a coverage of about 10 kilometres at least of channels, but now we're going to add probably another 7 to 10 kilometres in the work we've recently done. So we'll have that announced shortly along with our resource extension results a bit halfway through the year. We won't do an updated resource until the end of the year. It is expensive doing an updated resource with consultants because you need that independence. So we said we don't need it until the end of the year. Let's take the time to get as much result in as we can. We'll have 2 drill rigs working there from approximately the middle of the year onwards, and that's going to help us add to those pounds. Yeah, so it's a busy time. The team is well established. We're still recruiting people, but that's going well. On top of that Samphire work and the feasibility that we want to do next year, we are getting on the ground for another drilling program, this time deeper drilling program at Alligator Rivers in our Narberth North project. We've got some specific targeted areas that we have identified getting into to drill, and that work will start in July. We're preparing for that now. And we are doing our first drilling program at our Big Lake Uranium project, which is in the sediments overlying the Cooper Basin, the hydrocarbon basin where Santos, Beach, and a lot of energy companies have been drawing out from 2 to 3 kilometres deep the gas and oil. We're looking at the sediments over the top, which are the same sediments to the south of that area, which host Beverly, 4 Mile, and Honeymoon. And no one's had a decent look, but there's definitely gamma spikes in those sediments, and there's definitely uranium present from historical assays. So our first drilling program will be underway there in May. So we've been taking our time to get everything right, but it's getting on the ground this year in a big way.
Appreciate that. That's lots of good information there. You guys got a lot of things on the plate here, a lot of work to do. And I want to stay on Samphire for just a moment, and then we'll come back just a little bit and talk some of the other stuff here in a moment. But post-field recovery trial, Greg, talk about, just give the audience and maybe some of those that aren't familiar generally, and then also some of those that are just not familiar with Alligator. We do have new audience that are listening and probably listening for the first time to hear you. But talk about the next steps on how you plan to accelerate the economic studies. With this in parallel, you have obviously offtake discussions and things that have already happened on that front, financing, and then of course construction. But given market conditions are very amenable to this type of project, and also the whole goal of bringing forward essentially that MPV as much as possible to take advantage of these market conditions and improve value for shareholders. Obviously, MPV at 15 years down the road doesn't look like much, but it does look like something a couple of years out. Just talk about those things and how you see future of Samphire. Obviously, you have enough pounds there to go to a mine, but just talk about what you see post-field recovery trial, because I think that it will probably show some successful results and it will allow you guys to get down the road fairly quickly.
Okay, well, the first thing to understand is, as many people know, we published very good bench scale results in terms of the leachability of the sediments we have at 70 to 80 metres deep in Samphire. It's got a very ancient saline water aquifer, but even despite that salinity, we get excellent leaching of the uranium out of the sands. Bringing that material out into a reasonable grade, part per million grade of the pregnant mixed solution into an ISR plant is important, and we need to prove that with the pilot process in 3 different rings, different parts of the ore body, rings of holes. So we'll be running that, getting that information, and making that work. The next step is you've got to get it through an IX plant where you have resins in IX columns, steel columns, which allow the uranium to transfer from the pregnant solution onto the resins. And then once they're loaded on the resin, you then clean them off with a different chemical solution into a clean eluate, which contains the uranium ready for drying, calcining, and product packing. So importantly about the pilot plant is confirming the leaching occurs through the rings in the sands that we need, getting the RO plant, the reverse osmosis plant, lowering the salinity enough so that the IX columns work effectively and you're not swamping them with saline salts, and that's important. We've shown that in the bench scale, we need to show it in real life, and then making sure we get a clean eluate. The steps after the eluate, as you and I have discussed before, are pretty standard: drying, calcining, and product packing. We don't need to test them in the pilot process. We'll just get some samples made from the eluate for converter analysis. So those results are important because they lead straight into the feasibility study. We've already got a range of economic factors about how the plant's likely to run. This pilot process tightens up those ranges. It gives you the volumes of reagents you're going to use, the volumes of acid you're going to use to lower the pH, the amount of saline water volumes you've got to circulate, because it's all using the same groundwater. You don't have to add water. And so all of those factors mean your feasibility study is to the right level of accuracy for a plus or minus 15%, which is what a feasibility study's got to be. We'll be running that through next year, but the important thing about that is you've still got to get a mining lease approval to run an operating mine. You need the first stage of the feasibility with the detailed design of your well fields and your plant to be able to put that into the mining lease approval documentation. But we started the mining lease approval work for the flora fauna studies and everything more than a year ago. So we've already been working on it. Our team doing the approvals have been working on the retention lease and the operating plan for the pilot process. That took a bit of work, and it's been great working with the department here, who do have experience in ISR uranium, of course, in South Australia, and great working with them to get this in place. But as soon as we have all that in place, that team swings straight across to the mining lease approval. But we won't really have that documentation in until somewhere between the middle of 25 and the end of 25. And look, that, to be honest, that's still going to be a 1.5 to 2 year process to get that approved. So you already can see, your listeners can already hear, that is going to be the critical timeline. That's why we're working on that as fast as we can. Now, that doesn't mean we won't make other advances. For example, we're going to keep drilling and lifting our resource, because if you can lift your resource, and you can look at alternates in your feasibility study, then maybe you can say we're doing a main feasibility at 1.2 million pound per annum, but we've got an alternate, which means if we get the right resource size at the right time, we could do a quick addition up to 2 million pound per annum. So can we increase the resource base in the immediate next 2 years that allow us to have an upside to which we could start very rapidly in production? So you might kick it off at 1.2 million pound and you rapidly move up within 2 years to 2 million pound. Can that be done? Is that feasible? That's what our resource drilling is about, and that's what our feasibility will be about. And you are right, Andrew. You've increased value so much more if you've got that production, increased production occurring much earlier in the picture. So that's why we've said quite clearly our resource drilling is not only to increase the years of operation beyond 12, but also increase the production rate. And that's what we're trying to do. So we still have a lot of work to do to get this project in place, but the good thing about having a state of South Australia where they've approved 5 uranium mines, including 4 ISR mines, and have operated them, and they've got a regulatory regime in place, that makes that more comfortable to do. But even in an experienced state, to go from a brand new mine in a new area, it still takes some time. But you can tell from that we are looking down the track in 27, 28 to be really getting on the ground with an approved project. But we'll make sure that we fast track everything we can, but some things will take the time they take.
Greg, I appreciate that. And I think that gives great flavor to the audience as to the plans and how fast, and the fact that you guys are already progressing a lot of the things that maybe some other folks haven't been able to do so quickly and so effectively. So I appreciate that. And I think quite abundant, at least to our office, that the team here is quite capable of bringing this forward, and the ability to actually operate and produce. One other thing on this core project before we move on to the exploration work that's happening in Alligator Rivers and Big Lake. You guys have done more drill work since we've talked. There's more drill work coming, expansion drilling at Blackbush. And then, of course, the overall tenements, if you will, in that area are quite large. And there's a
Yep.
lot to do with respect to satellites and continuation. Just speak to the prospectivity, if you will, of the Blackbush overall Samphire project grounds, because they're quite large and generally untested.
Well, no, that's a good point. We did put out an announcement in December last year, which was our first with an exploration target range. Now, so your listeners understand, under the JORC compliant code, where companies listed on the stock exchange in Australia and many others around the world still follow this process, you need to have a certain compliance about what you announce and how you announce. You've got to have a certain knowledge, and you've got to have a certain credibility about that knowledge. You've got to have a detailed table that shows how you've gathered the data. And generally, you can either have in-house people develop it, or you can have independent groups develop it. But either way, as directors of a company, we're held liable by law that that information has to be accurate under the JORC code. Now, we put out a scoping study update, but we also put out an exploration target range on the Samphire project for the first time. So this is what you're allowed to do is if you've got a confidence based on historical drilling mineralisation intersections and what you're finding in your resource, if you've got a confidence that you're going to get extensions to that by some measure, you can put out what's called a target range to exhibit that confidence. So we put out a target range which was at a very pessimistic level of an additional 14 million pound on top of resource to an additional 75 million pound on top of resource. Now that was based on the area of paleochannels we already know we have, and any of your listeners who can look at our presentations that are on our website or online will show the area of paleochannels that we already have over a distance of around 10 kilometres. And these paleochannels are well known. The Blackbush deposit itself at the current size is only 10% of those paleochannels, the known ones. And in fact, we've only got about another 30% of those channels which have mineralised intersections. There's 60% of those channels undrilled. So that's a big growth opportunity. Now, we're just extending that, as I mentioned. We'll have an announcement out shortly. We've done the ground gravity surveys to identify these channels from the surface of where they lie for the bottom part of the tenement, which is going to add another almost 10 kilometres of channels. A slightly narrower zone, but it'll be a lot more channels. When there's already historical intersections within those areas, so we know there are channels containing mineralisation. So that gives us great opportunity. So our first expansion step is around Blackbush. You really do add lots of value for shareholders if you increase your resource adjacent to where your first plant's going to be and to the existing well fields where you're going to be. You're in the area, you've got a full approval, and you can keep going, and that's the value. But we will be getting on to more regional expansion work in the coming 12 months. We want to not only do the ground gravity work, but also commence some drilling operations in the southern part of the tenement around the Plumbush prospect. We call it a prospect now because 12 years ago it was a resource, but the JORC code tightened up. And now with the density of drilling and the updated information, it's not a resource anymore. It's a prospect, but it won't take much drilling to bring it back into a resource mode. So we want to get down onto that ground in the coming 12 months as well to enhance that. So we believe we've got a lot of opportunity to add some pounds into this project over the coming 2 to 3 years.
That's great. And that gives the audience a bit of a flavor here as far as expansion potential there and satellite potential for the Samphire project. And of course, processing facilities surrounding Blackbush. Just coming back briefly here, I know you already mentioned that there'll be exploration programs planned for Big Lake, of which my understanding is there is the potential for ISR amenability at Big Lake, but then also conventional at Alligator Rivers. Just touch on those because I want to establish that pipeline is important, and I think you realize that. And with your expertise and history in the sector, you understand that pipeline is quite important, and you can never really be a single asset, single province, single jurisdiction, what have you, company, because it doesn't always end well. And so pipeline is important, but just talk about the potential of those other programs and what you're doing there.
No, thanks, Andrew. I'll start on the Alligator Rivers region first. So we've been operating as a company there since 2010, and that's where the name of the company originally came from. And the Alligator Rivers are full of crocodiles, of course, not alligators, but that's just a interpretation from people in the early days that named those rivers 100 years ago. But we started work on the ground because the team that started Alligator Energy was an experienced team out of the Northern Territory. They're based out of Brisbane, but they've worked both for ERA and on exploration in Arnhem Land and in Northern Queensland as well. So that region is one that we know well. I myself also was a mining operations manager at Ranger Mine in the Northern Territory in that region in the late 90s for about 4 years. So between us, we've got a lot of knowledge of the area. But we've done a lot of work over tenements we've picked up off Cameco in the past and some other projects off others and tenements that we've had granted right from scratch, brand new tenements. And the biggest work we've done is engagement with traditional owners. The Arnhem Land region where we are, so this is not Ranger or Jabiluka, which is standalone leases surrounded by Kakadu National Park. This is further to the east, and in that area, the land is controlled by Indigenous groups and owned by them, and therefore you're working with Indigenous groups. So we've had multiple agreements in place with those groups for many years. We've worked closely with them. We've had more than 40 Indigenous employees, and in fact, last year we had a range of Indigenous employees working on our drilling in our Narberlek North project. The good thing about this latest work we're doing up there on the Narberlek North group of 11 tenements, which is to the north of the old Narberlek mine, as it says, and that's held by DevEx, who are doing some good work on their ground there. The good thing about this work to the north is it's not overlain by the sandstone, the barren sandstone that overlays this area in a lot of ways and gives that beautiful escarpment from Kakadu National Park that many people see in photographs. The good thing about not having that sandstone there, you can get into the geology of the basement very quickly. So we've already in a year and a half potentially identified where we believe the geology and the right rocks are, in particular the Kale formations that hold the uranium in the major deposits of Ranger and Jabiluka. So that Kale formation rocks are the ones we're after. We know where the granite outlines are to some extent and that, but we've got to test that a little more. We've got to do some more deeper RC drilling, which is both stratigraphy testing, but now we are testing on the basis of geophysics surveys, radiometric surveys, both by us and by the NT Department of Mines, a lot of historical drilling and others. So we are now starting to look for potential traps that could contain uranium, in particular structural traps. And so that work is about to get underway in a program from July onwards. And the reason we're doing it from July, not May or June, is one, the wet season can extend a bit, and you really can only get on the ground in May, first of all, but sometimes that's delayed. But the second reason is we're about to do our first drilling program on Big Lake uranium in South Australia. So we want to share some resources there. So a small company like ours, we want to do both programs this year. It's better to stagger them so that we can have our shared resources on both. So Alligator Rivers is important. We're going to do a series of, I think, up to about 8,000 metres of potential RC drilling and really give that a good hit with some targeted there. With Big Lake, now the Big Lake sediments have had only, which sit at the top, let's say the top 300 metres, but we're looking initially in the top 150 metres. Those sediments have had a little bit of mineralised drilling back about 14 years ago, where there was little spikes of uranium, probably 10 centimetres or 15 centimetres of 300 part per million. Now, that doesn't mean that that's all that's there, because what it shows is there's uranium in the system. You've got a reductant in the leakage of gas, which is the reductant that helps to drop out uranium in things like the Powder River Basin and Kazakhstan and Texas. And you've got uranium present and the right rocks for potential traps to occur. So we're trying to have all of them come together in the idealized part of these sediments, which could give us a brand new in situ recovery field. So a brand new field containing uranium, which is amenable to ISR. Now, that's a big step. We're still very much in the greenfield stage. We've interpreted all the seismic data. We've done some EM data. We want to do a bit more, but we need to drill now to really test the stratigraphy versus our interpretation of it from these geophysics methods. We're targeting potential trap areas we see from the geophysics could be trap areas. So we're targeting them, but we're mainly drilling for stratigraphy. I don't want to promise the world we're going to hit uranium in the first drilling program in a brand new area. It can take 2 to 3 years to find a significant field. But we are approaching this in the right way. We've got good horsepower on our books for people who know this sort of basin structural architecture and the sediments. Of course, Andrea and her team have got the expertise in reduction oxidation zones and that redox boundaries where you find uranium that occurs into roll fronts. And so we're giving it our best shot. And that drilling will be important, our first stratigraphic drilling there to really show what have we got and what are we going to be doing in our future programs.
Greg, thank you for highlighting that. And I think it just points to the potential of your guys' pipeline and the ability to demonstrate that in the years to come. And most folks would be nuts to think that that first drill program is going to yield something exceptional. Obviously, you have to miss to study it. That's part of that's part of it.
That's what geologists love to say. I would love it if we hit something, but don't worry, the market will be the first to know if we do.
Well, I want to just move on just quickly to Piedmont, Italy. Talk about that as far as plans, monetization. Will that stay in the pipeline? What are your thoughts there?
No, we've made it clear in our statements and our quarterly, which is about to come out, we'll make it clear that no, we're looking for a strategic partner to either come in on this or someone who wants to take it off our hands. As an ASX listed company in Australia, having a nickel cobalt project in an area in northern Italy, which is a historical mining region and it has got good support, both community support and government support for work, we just really don't get the market traction for our shareholders on the ASX for that. But other companies are doing work in Europe and Eastern Europe and in Scandinavia in nickel, cobalt, critical energy minerals, strategic minerals. And they're the companies that we would like to get this in front of and have a look. We've had a talk to a couple in the past and some signed some CAs to come and have a look at it. But in this case, we want to pursue with slightly different group of companies who, let's say, might be counter-cyclical investors into nickel cobalt opportunities, because there's no question that nickel cobalt prices will swing and have swings and roundabouts the same as lithium has done and others. But we do see them being stronger going forward. And so we're trying to attract a company that will come into these projects with us. And to that end, we've got an information memorandum that's about to go out to a range of parties. And I'll be meeting with a few of those parties in the coming weeks directly to talk to them about it. So we don't see it as necessarily long-term for Alligator, but we might be a part of it, but we do want another player to help us both fund it and to take it forward as part of their interest in those critical minerals. We are interested in critical minerals in a more homegrown sense, and you would have seen the investment we've made into in situ recovery copper here in South Australia. And we see that sense because we have ISR expertise within our group, and that expertise is expanding. We like the company EnviroCopper that we picked up a shareholding in because they have expertise in ISR, not only uranium, but also in copper. And they've now enhanced that expertise through a range of R&D and modelling of fractured rock aquifers in the oxide copper zones of South Australia, of which there are many. The people may not know that the endowment of copper in South Australia is massive. At the turn of the century, from 1800s to 1900s, to 1900s early, the Burra copper mine in South Australia was the biggest copper mine in the world. There is massive sulfide deposits, as you know, from Olympic Dam, from Carrapateena, from Prominent Hill. But what people don't know is there's a lot of oxide copper near the surface, which is difficult to take. It's very hard to get a recovery through flotation or any other method. So a lot of people, if the grade's right, do a bit of leaching, heap leaching. But a cheaper method like in situ recovery, solution mining through drill holes in where there's enough fractured rock and the groundwater table is the right form, that is very amenable to ISR mining in the future, we believe, and that's why we're doing this investment. We think this, and we've got the opportunity to take up to 50.5% of the company. So we really want to give that a good shake through the group that's doing the work. It's not going to detract from our expertise off our projects because we're investing into a team that is already established. So on the one hand, we like nickel cobalt and we'd love to have some critical minerals that are working in the right manner, in the right way, but we think that the Italian is going to sit better with others, whereas we like the ISR copper in South Australia. It suits us with our expertise in the group.
It's very close to home and makes sense, and I agree with the approach here. And thank you for bringing up EnviroCopper. It's one that was going to ask about that, of course, and how you saw that. And it's interesting. We closely follow the work by Taseko Mines to bring on its copper ISR project in Arizona, and of course, we know some of the people there. Incidentally, happen to be a lot of uranium expertise that's been brought on to that project.
Correct.
So best of luck with EnviroCopper folks advancing that work and seeing what they can put together there, because this is new. There has been challenges, reference Gunnison, for example. I think Arizona, Taseko, really good group there. And I think the market's starting to realize that based on their work, it's worked out really well in testing and, obviously test production. We're going to see very soon how that works out.
Yeah, we know that the team in EnviroCopper have very good exploration and development R&D expertise. What our team has is taking ISRs into production and producing from them. Our group that Andrea has put together has ISR production expertise, so we see that's a good overlay with the copper ISR. And the second thing is that what ECL has done is they've managed to work with the South Australian government to a level of comfort where they're actually doing this initial ISR field trials of solution mining on exploration leases. They don't actually have to get a retention lease like we do for the uranium project at Samphire. So they've done already a great job with the South Australian government of advancing these projects and with the communities in the areas they're working, which is good.
Greg, capital structure for just a moment. Give us an update as far as where we are on shares outstanding, the cash on hand, and how far that gets you. And then, of course, key shareholders, including management.
Well, look, whenever I talk to listeners about the capital structure in the company, of course, I have to mention that we have about 3.8 billion shares on issue, and I know a lot of the North American market look at this in Australia and say, my God, these ASX companies have so many shares on issue and a share price of 5, 6, 7 cents. But the key thing about that for us is it gives us massive liquidity. We actually have a range of investors interested in us, right from mum and dad shareholders who can buy a small parcel and either sit or sell as they move, to day traders, to hedge funds who come in, will take an opportunity to accumulate some stock or come in at a placement, and they know we're going to be varying depending on our announcements and on the market. And if they need to sell a parcel, they can sell a parcel within 1 or 2 days. So that liquidity, that the shares and the attraction of the number of shareholders we have, being nearly 8,000 shareholders, really attracts a range of investors. So it's the right thing to keep doing for the time being. We don't think we'll look at that capital structure until we're right into a feasibility mine approval stage, because at that time you want a different series of investors. You want investors who are longer term. They're going to come in to ride that wave of going through feasibility, mine approval, financing, commissioning. And we've all seen companies similar to Alligator who've gone through that stage and have gone from 100 mil market cap to 800 mil market cap or higher. Once we have got the results from the pilot trial feeding into the feasibility, that starts to change where we might be. But it's the capital structure for the time being suits us in terms of investment traction, and liquidity allows investors to move in and out depending on what they see. And whether we like it or not, Alligator can still be classed as an exploration company. We're about to do a field trial. We're about to go into feasibility. Those two will take us to a development company in the minds of many significant investors. So we are in a change year going forward for us, which is fantastic. We are well funded. We've still, we'll have our quarterly report out shortly, but at the start of the year, we had 37 million in the bank. We raised substantially last year. That's going to fund right through this year the work we need to do, and really add those results, which is beautiful for us. And then it still gives us the horsepower to look at other things, a la the Enviro Copper ISR project, or indeed any other opportunities that might bring to look at our pipeline. So we're quite comfortable where we are in a capital basis, but certainly very thankful to the shareholders and the investors who came in to help us raise the funds last year, which are giving us this leg up from an explorer to a development company over the coming 12 months. A lot of our shareholders are through nominee companies. While we do a search behind the scenes to see who they are, we know who they are. We don't make a lot of song and dance about it because they're preferentially not wanting to be known. But we don't usually have anyone with more than a 5% holding. Some of your listeners might have seen that Macquarie Group recently went over 5%, announced that, and then went under again. So they've been accumulating, and it depends on their status of play and what they do. The McCallum Group out of Perth, Peter McIntyre is one of our directors who runs the McCallum Group, and Peter was, of course, the MD of Extract, who found the giant USAB deposit and sold that on at a very effective time in the last uranium boom. So McCallum Group still have a reasonable shareholding, but in terms of directors and management of the company, we have really only about a 3% shareholding, and that's just because most of it has been accumulated by directors and management as they achieve strategic aims and short-term incentives on the path to going forward. There has been funds put in by McCallum Group in the past, and they've just basically diluted down as we've done major capital raisings with others now. But we are a well-spread capital group, no major shareholders, but a lot of interest. Now, the ETF funds in uranium are becoming larger shareholders. They can be between 3 and 5%. So they are becoming important, the two main ones in particular. But apart from that, we've got probably about a 12 to 15% shareholding in North America, and an increasing shareholding in Europe. Surprisingly, there's a range of high net worths and investment groups there that are gradually picking up, 1-2% of us. So there is a growing shareholder base in Europe as well.
Greg, I appreciate that. I'll come back and comment just briefly on what you said about cap structure. The reality is when you look at the math of these things, it's fairly basic. I mean, it's fairly basic math to understand cap structures and valuation, market cap, et cetera, what value has been brought out of that. And looking at fairly limited data relatively quickly here, Alligator has been a top performing company on my screen in the top five across the cycle. And so if that speaks to capital structure, I think that kind of puts it in its place right there, that while a cap structure might have a billion shares out, and at the end of the day, let's look at total performance here and see how that's gone. And Alligator has performed real well, and that's just been on the basis that management has been able to put together some value attractive items through the course of this company. And so I think you just have to stop there and take a look at that, irrespective of the cap structure. So I appreciate your comments on that. One of the other things, just on the community front, I'm going to lump a bunch of stuff in here. And of course, you could pick and choose what you want to respond to. And we can carry this right to the broader Australia national level, Greg. But your efforts at Alligator Energy to assist the industry with wisdom transfer, look, you and I both know, sadly and admittedly, that we have a severely aging demographic in this business,
Mm.
and that some people are reluctant to provide opportunity to younger potential talent. And I know you've actually made efforts on this yourself, and I commend you for that. But from the Alligator level, what work is being done to educate, incentivize skills development in areas of engineering, mining, fuel cycle, chemistry, and also education of communities, use of local service providers, and even education, Greg, the education of bureaucrats in Australia
Mm.
that really don't understand energy and the benefits of an atom splitting steam power station, as I'll say, or
Mm.
even the industry itself. What are your comments on those things?
All right, well, thanks for that. That's broad ranging. I'll comment initially on something that's very important that you said, and it's dear to my heart, and that is the skill sets in our industry and the knowledge base within our industry to allow it to grow and operate effectively. In Australia, we've had bursts of uranium mining. We've had some continuity in companies such as ERA, with Rio Tinto as a major shareholder, and they've had people moving through ERA and going out again. So you get a few years training of in particular of professional expertise, and then it's off into aluminium or copper or something else. The same with Olympic Dam, with BHP owning it. You've had people coming through uranium and quite often then moving on to other things. So while you get a generic knowledge in a professional group of uranium mining processing, it doesn't stay. It moves into other commodities from those larger companies. Now, that's why Heathgate has been so important. Heathgate's owned by General Atomics, the US group. It's privately owned. It has a solid workforce, and it's had a range of workforce that have moved through it. And of course, between Duncan Crabb at Boss Energy and Greg Hall at Alligator Energy, we've recruited a lot of people who have worked at Heathgate in the past. And if you have a look at our workforce, the dominant amount of our workforce in Alligator has worked at Heathgate and are now on the Samphire project. So it's incredibly valuable to have ongoing operations which help train people through. But it's also so important for us as newcomers to start this process from day one. We have already 2 geological graduates. We're recruiting a third. We're about to recruit a process chemist graduate. We're already looking at graduates and expertise in community engagement, stakeholder engagement, and things like that. So we've got 2 on the books. We're about to have 4, and we'll keep going. You need to be bringing people into this industry so that they will learn from a good period of time with a uranium company about going through the exploration stage, the resource stage, the development stage, construction stage, commissioning, and production. And so we want to have a young team under us making sure that happens. So we're definitely doing that. We're already recruiting them, and we're doing it early to make sure that occurs. And I know that others in Australia are doing that as well. So that's important in terms of that expertise. Your other comments about, let's start at the back end, the bureaucrats and politics in Australia. Look, it has been reasonably settled for a period of time now, and that is that South Australia has bipartisan support. The 2 major parties in South Australia, the Labor and Liberal Party, both have approved uranium mines in South Australia, both support uranium mining in South Australia and have done for many years and still do. And that's not wavering. That's ongoing. The current Premier of the state is very supportive. The current Mines Minister is very supportive. Similar in the Northern Territory, both major parties have had bipartisan support of uranium mining. Similar at a federal level, and while some of your listeners might be confused to hear this, the federal Labor government right now is not wanting to look at nuclear power. They believe it's a distraction to the main game of renewables and getting support around renewables base. Now, many of us in industry believe they should be removing the ban on allowing nuclear power to be considered in Australia and letting the market decide and evaluate. But at the moment, they don't wish to do that. They still have a lot of legacy issues from their support base from the old 1970s ban the bomb anti-nuclear days, but nonetheless, and they claim they've got economic reasons not to lift the ban, but in general there is a lot of pressure on the current incumbent federal Labor government to do that. However, they are very strong in their approval of uranium mines. In fact, the last uranium mine to be approved in the state of South Australia was approved by the South Australian government and also by the Federal Environment Minister at the time, Peter Garrett. Now, Peter was a staunch anti-nuclear advocate for many years, and those of you know he was the lead singer of Midnight Oil Band. But he had no choice but to approve the mine because technically, economically, and safety, he could see, and his bureaucrats could see it was the right thing to do, and so 4 Mile was approved. So there is approval processes for uranium mining in South Australia, Northern Territory, and federally. Western Australia is now considering also whether to remove its ban on uranium mining, and from the Labor Party side, it does have Liberal support, and that might be the next state that will become open for uranium mining. And the Minerals Council of Australia, the Uranium Forum within that group who I'm part of, we are pushing very hard to try to get that state to change. So uranium mining in South Australian Northern Territory is there. It's able to be expanded. Potentially Western Australia with some of its projects can be expanded. But I think it will be, I'm thinking 10 to 15 years before Australia is going to seriously start to look at nuclear power for the country. So it's not going to have a big bearing on the value we bring to our shareholders, but certainly both myself and other uranium operator leaders in this country still are talking with the government about the value of nuclear power, and we'll try to make that happen.
I appreciate your efforts on that. I mean, it's important for a country like Australia to understand the benefits of that and to finally get over the hump with respect to construction. It doesn't have to be an SMR. It could be, might fit better. Conventional too. I lean towards conventional as you probably would for different reasons, and that SMRs are of a challenge in different ways. But conventional is proven. It's there. It's been demonstrated. It's been proven. And I think any country now, as they move up the quality curve of energy, quality of energy, if you will have to start to face the reality that splitting atoms works out really, really well compared to the alternatives. Save the conversation for another day, but renewables, the math is not working out. Last thing, I wanted to give you an opportunity just to talk a little bit about your guys' local community efforts and utilization of local service providers.
Yeah, thank you for that. Look, in particular, we have focused on this in the Whyalla region, the region where Samphire is. Samphire, the project sits 20 kilometres south of the regional town of Whyalla. That's about 20,000 people. It's been an iron ore mining centre probably for 80 years or more. So it's steel mills operating. They're being modernised. They're now owned by the Gupta family, and they're about to be modernised. So it's been a regional support base with a lot of companies based there, and these are engineering companies, fabrication companies, supply companies, electrical companies, doing support work for the Olympic Dam copper uranium mine, for Carrapateena copper mine, and for other projects. So we're fortunate enough to be in an area where there is that regional support for the industry and close by support for the industry. That does mean that in a scoping study sense, and people who've looked at our scoping study will know this, our capital cost of the project is much cheaper because we don't have to build a camp. We don't have to build an airstrip. We don't have to build a 300-kilometre power line, a 300-kilometre water line. They're very short. They're very close. So that gives us that as an opportunity. But we don't take it for granted because we're starting a uranium project in an area that's never had one. Okay, sure, they're 300 kilometres away up at Honeymoon or up at Beverly, but that's 300 kilometres away. Now we're only 20 kilometres from the centre, and that does bring those people who are unfamiliar with uranium, who've just heard lots and lots of negative about it through their lives, say, well, I need to ask questions about this, and we want them to ask questions. So we've had a very, very open, transparent approach since we took over the project in late 2020 and have been engaged with the Whyalla City Council. key business leaders and community leaders in there. We've got an agreement already with the Bungala Indigenous Group, which cover this whole area where we are, and further to the south and north as well. And with the pastoralists whose ground we're operating on. So we're above the rainfall line. So cropping is done much to the south of us, but we're in an area of pastoral activity with mainly sheep. And we've got a full agreement with the one pastoralist around the Blackbush project, and we're talking with the other pastoralists on a constant basis. So we have regional community, some experienced in mining, some not. We have Indigenous people, we have pastoral community, and we're working with all of them. So we've in particular around the approval of our retention lease for this pilot trial. Andrea and myself and our team have spent a long time on the ground with open, transparent sessions, inviting people to come in, talk one-on-one with any of our team. We have our hydrogeologist there, our principal geologist, our processing chemist, our radiation specialist, environmental manager, all of them. 7 or 8 of us will be in the room, and you can talk one-on-one to any one of us. And so we found that's a very successful formula for people to come, and we're very open, show the big layout plans on the desk, we show presentation as needed. But we actually want to ask questions. We want to ask them, what's worrying you? What do you know? What have you heard? Where does your worry come from? What do you think we could do to communicate more? We actually ask so many questions before we start to talk, because we need to find out how people think about the project and how think about where we are, how think about us. And we get good feedback after those sessions that we've provided an open, transparent method. We even ask people, say, do you mind if we let you know what we found out so far? And it's important how you phrase this, because we don't know everything. We're still learning things as we go. We know about the hydrogeology, but we still learn. We know about the geology, but we still learn. We know about the environment and the rehabilitation we're doing, but we're still learning. So part of that learning is asking people, what do they know about us? What have they heard? Where do they think we should be focusing some effort and information flow? So look, because I've been in uranium since 1981, talking with people who just have not understood our industry and have tried to help that understanding, we now have a team who've also been in it a long time, anywhere from a few years to 25, 30 years. And we're using the skills of our team to talk openly and transparently to people.
Greg, that it was very well said. I appreciate the points and some of the specifics that you guys are working on there. I think those are well taken. And then also, I just encourage the audience to have a look at, obviously, if you're in Adelaide, to go take a look at the site and to set that up with the company, but also just to take a look at the photos and where this lies and the topography of what we're talking about here. It's so important to get your head around that as well. Well, Greg, look, this has been a great discussion, and I think we better cut it off here just for the sake of time here and let you get on with your day and as well as mine. But always good to get updates and discuss the market. Thanks for your time. Finish up with this. For potential investors who are listening in, the company has a market capitalization of about 205 million Australian dollars. Why should Alligator Energy be considered within the institutional, family office, and retail investors portfolio at this stage?
Well, thanks, Andrew. And look, what I would say to people is you've just heard me talk about what we're doing and where we're going. But the important thing is we started as an exploration group in uranium. We have that long expertise over now 15 years of exploration in uranium. We started to enhance our business in 2018 and 2020. We've acquired projects which are later stage and existing resources. We now have at Samphire a project which is coming out of that exploration resource development stage into pilot trial feasibility development stage and leading on to approvals immediately at the same time. So we're transitioning from that exploration resource stage into feasibility approval stage for a project to start up in the coming years. Now, anyone who's invested in uranium projects over the last 5 years will see that adds massive market growth to your capital. It really does give the opportunity for new players investing in the company and the business to come in. It also means it will be attracting the attention of those who are looking for projects that are development production ready. And so that's the transition we're going through this year and into next year. And we're very excited about it.
Greg, and the best way for interested parties to reach the company.
Certainly on all the presentations that we put out and on our website, my direct email is there, and I'm happy to have a direct email. We also have an email to community and to reception information at Alligator Energy if you'd rather do that. I'm happy to talk. If shareholders contact me directly via email, I tend to like to ring them so I can have a little chat about what their interest is and what they're doing. And I'm happy to do that to any shareholders listening as well.
Greg, well, thank you for that. That's an extra personal step, and I really appreciate that comment. Always a pleasure to have you on the program. Looking forward to having you back in the near future to update on activities, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and all the best.